In 2132, space voyaging is ordinary, and the organization AmberCop conveys boats to mine different planets and catch outsider animals to take back to Earth as a food source. There's a legend that discussions about Void Area, where probably an individual can get purged of every one of their debasements. It has no illness and no anguish, just clearness. Right up till now, no one has arrived at this spot since it's safeguarded by a monster animal known as Tenlong. One day, two space trackers figure out how to view as Tenlong. Commander Bentley starts shooting, yet Tenlong's mate obstructs the shot with her scales. Hawthorne comes out, wearing an extraordinary suit, and focuses on the mate's point of concern on her neck, figuring out how to kill her. This incenses Tenlong, who starts pursuing Hawthorne while Bentley prepares to go after once more. Anyway, his shot misses, and he fails to keep a grip on the boat as a brilliant light out of nowhere sparkles behind him. Then Tenlong assaults the boat, exploding it and killing Bentley. After 24 years, Lynn lands her bicycle outside a cafe, yet can't go inside since there's a gatekeeper at the entryway. She works for the ICE, or Interstellar Protection Implementation. Inside the structure, Bentley's child Richard is having a gathering with an obscure finance manager who keeps an animal known as Insane Bug inside a glass. This man has a guide with every one of the places where Tenlong has been seen as the years progressed and offers a succulent prize for the animal's body. At that point, the watchman comes in to let them know they're being watched by the ICE also. The financial specialist thinks Richard has set them up. The watchman gets Richard by the neck, and the financial specialist attempts to embed the bug in his ear, yet Richard thumps it off his hand. Then he snatches a fork and gets the watchman off by wounding him. Another watchman comes after him and figures out how to kick him, yet he takes her out with a jar. The finance manager crushes a seat on Richard's spirit and hits him a couple of times until Richard handles him down. They land on a table and Richard fires, thumping the finance manager, who breaks a container and attempts to wound him with it. Seeing the bug close by, Richard pushes the man's face down, and the bug enters through his nose, holding him somewhere near causing incredible agony. A third watchman has a go at starting to shoot, yet presently Richard can simply snatch the guide and leave. Seeing this, Lynn leaves too. After 90 days, Lynn is preparing to work secret in the Essex spaceship. Her representative records have been cleaned off, and presently she should profess to be a mining and fishing escort with an inventory request. After she leaves, her collaborators examine Lynn's conviction that she'll be restored by the Void Area. Minutes after the fact, Lynn sheets the Essex and meets the commander, who is Richard. His sibling Owen gives her a visit through the boat and acquaints her with all the group including the cook Batali, who advises Lynn to avoid her sweetheart Harpo. In the kitchen, there's an old cryopod that is currently utilized as a refrigerator. A now-old Hawthorne is likewise important for the team, and he turned into a lush in the wake of losing Bentley. Thereafter, Lynn stays in her room and works with her very own PC. Her profile shows up first, uncovering she has a growth and just a half year to live. Next, she checks the intel her supervisor sent her and learns each and every group part has a criminal past, so she should watch out. In a little while, Hawthorne, Harpo, and Owen put on the extraordinary suits and go out to chase a few animals known as clickers. Lynn poses inquiries during the entire cycle, which Richard finds peculiar on the grounds that fishing escorts ought to know these things. The threesome waves a stone that the clickers love, and the little ones promptly follow it into the holder. The large clicker will not go in and drifts away when the men shoot it. Owen breaks arrangement and flies after it, overlooking the reproving from the others. The enormous clicker enters a space rock, and Owen takes an alternate passage to meet it ahead. However, at that point, a white light sparkles splendidly for a couple of moments and takes him out. Before long, something extremely huge shows up on the radar, so Harpo and Hawthorne rush to drive the compartment into the boat. Richard shoots a spear that interfaces with the space rock, so when Owen awakens, he can clutch it. As he moves around, he unintentionally hits his head, and he begins moving gradually. Incredibly, Tenlong shows up neighboring, so Owen shoots a tracker that stalls out for the monster's scopes. The entire team watches the monster fly away prior to reeling Owen back into the boat. In the interim, Tenlong vanishes into the splendid light. Later during supper, Lynn shares the narrative of a boat that vanished while finding Tenlong, and she guesses it tracked down the blank area. Assuming there are dark openings that can be placed, She thinks the white ones are the exit. The team giggles since they think the blank area is a fantasy, so Lin shares a substitute hypothesis. Since the clickers should follow Ten Lung, following the tracker Owen through could twofold their fishing load. Anyway, Richard says they've been looking for a really long time and now is the ideal time to return home. After supper, it's uncovered that Harpo is going behind Batali's back with the pilot Ragsland. Whenever they're done, Harpo goes to see Richard, saying he might want to go for the additional fishing Lin referenced on the grounds that he wants the cash. Richard makes sense of he doesn't need Lin continually investigating their shoulders, so they'll polish this request and drop her off first. Then, at that point, they can pursue the enormous burden. In the meantime, Lin slips into the comms room and makes an impression on the ice without seeing her transmission gets blocked. A couple of hours after the fact, Richard watches a recording from Bentley discussing Ten Lung and recalls the day his dad gifted him a blade. He's interfered with by Ragsland on the radio, who lets him know two little unidentified boats are drawing closer. Richard rushes to the cockpit and advises Ragsland to take off to lose them, but the boats rapidly block their direction. Understanding these are privateers, they must choose the option to get them before anybody gets injured. The group makes Ragsland and Batali conceal in a mysterious compartment while Richard puts a guide on the freight. He likewise makes everybody conceal their weapons to stay away from a showdown ideally. At the point when the privateers get on, they promptly notice Lin and begin annoying her. Owen attempts to shield her, however there's just a short battle before he gets his leg cut by a blade, and the privateer commander pushes Lin against the wall. She begins referencing every one of the punitive codes he's breaking and he gets dubious so he actually looks at under her shirt, tracking down her identification. The privateers take all the freight and supplies. They likewise put a tracker on the Essex prior to leaving. The group irately reprimands Lin on the grounds that they understood her reports probably stood out, and an enraged Richard orders Harpo to secure her in her room. A short time later, the team examines what to do since they just have 2 little sacks of food left. The possibilities completing the fishing request are low without provisions, yet they can't return with nothing. Richard proposes following Lin's thought and pursuing Ten Long, whose head would get them enough cash for exiting the workforce. They consent to make it happen. However, first they ought to essentially get a couple of clickers for food. Minutes after the fact, Owen keeps an eye on Lin and asks her for what valid reason she's there. So Lin clears up she's been pursuing for Fine Ten Long, and the main boat that follows the animal's course is the Essex. This causes Owen to understand that Richard has been following Ten Long from the start and goes to go up against him, making Richard concede he needs vengeance for their dad. Owen is irate on the grounds that he feels Richard is involving the team for his own mission, and no one agreed to this. Unexpectedly, the boat's front window is hit by a substance known as ambergris, which is entirely significant. Richard believes that Ten Long is leaving a path, however Owen calls it snare. Meanwhile, Harpo and Ragsland get grimy once more. After they're finished, Batali tracks down Ragsland's bra. A short time later, the folks go out in the unique suits to assemble the ambergris and catch an exceptionally large. While they're working, the privateers make an appearance to take this too, and Richard curses since he understands they tracked down his guide. They need the hyperdrive to get away, yet the group finds the privateers broke that too. The repairman Stubbs begins chipping away at fixing it, and Richard advises the group to get back on the boat, yet Harpo actually decides to remain to catch the clicker first. Before long, the privateers open fire, and keeping in mind that the Essex has a defensive power field, it won't keep going for a really long time. Richard orders Ragsland to deliver the waste chambers, not caring that Harpo is still outside since it was his decision. Harpo moves quick to evade the chambers and figures out how to get back to the Essex with the clicker he got. The chambers run into one of the privateer transports, however the other is as yet going. At the point when the privateer skipper shoots rockets that could obliterate the Essex, Stubbs at long last wraps up fixing the framework and the boat vanishes by utilizing hyperspeed. When they're protected, the team calls Richard out for disposing of their reference point. Harpo is especially angry, and when Richard calls attention to he disregarded orders, Harpo says he saved everybody's lives by getting food. Richard answers by pushing him, and Hawthorne needs to get between them to prevent things from heightening. In the interim, Stubbs is cleaning the ambergris from the suits when he sees that the lock on the clicker container is open. At the point when he's going to close it, he sees little bugs running on his hand and tearing into him. Before long, the animals are sneaking under his garments and he goes off the deep end attempting to get them off, making him fail to remember that the box is as yet opened. Stubbs hurries to the restroom to attempt to wash the bugs off, but they're currently inside his body. At the point when he gets back to his room, he continues hearing voices and starts shouting at the walls. After supper, Batali lets Harpo know that she's pregnant. Harpo goes crazy since kids are costly, so he chooses to take a portion of the ambergris and conceals it in the cooler. In the meantime, Richard keeps an eye on Lynn, who is against killing Tenlong. Anyway, she won't make sense of why, so Richard disregards her contention. After he leaves, Lynn meddles with the lock until she figures out how to break it, lastly gets away from her room. In the shadows of the passage, somebody is breaking the oxygen saves. Lynn attempts to sneak around discreetly, yet she's found by Harpo, who snatches her from behind. She promptly begins battling him and effectively overwhelms him on account of her representative preparation. At that point, Stubbs sees this and takes off shouting, diverting Lynn. This permits Harpo to take her out with an instrument. At the point when she awakens, she's secured in the freight narrows and hears Harpo let Richard know that she was the one breaking the oxygen holds. In the cockpit, Ragsland is snoozing and doesn't see the sign that shows up on the screen. When she awakens, it's gone. Batali carries a food to Lynn, who offers her a method for getting away securely. Yet Batali isn't intrigued. After Batali leaves, Lynn hears the clicker shrieking in its case while Ragsland and Richard hear an odd clamor reverberating around them. They actually take a look at the scanner and find many obliterated ships around the Essex, likely crafted by Tenlong. In the vents, Stubbs slithers around while cutting Cleanser with a blade. Sometime later, Richard tells Hawthorne it was Harpo who altered the oxygen. Hawthorne calls attention to, in some cases, individuals do insane things on the off chance that they're frantic, suggesting that Richard might have allowed the privateers to deny them deliberately as a feature of his arrangement to get Tenlong. Richard disregards the ramifications and notices Stubbs needs to fix the oxygen, yet it's not possible for anyone to track down him. In the freight cove, the clicker has gotten away from the carton and is attempting to go after Lynn, who continues to toss boxes to dial it back while hollering for help. Fortunately, Richard hears her and opens the entryway, getting her out prior to going after the clicker with a fire dowser. This sits idle, and the clicker emerges to begin pursuing the team down the hallway. Hitting it with the quencher is additionally incapable, so Richard and Lynn take off and conceal in the airtight chamber. The clicker is quickly enough to get up to speed to them and snatches Lynn's leg. Yet at that point, Richard discharges a carton that terrains on top of the clicker, killing it. A while later, Owen won't secure Lynn once more, and Richard lets him know she'll be his obligation. A contention results, and Owen blames Richard for being essentially as awful as their dad, who deserted the family to go searching for Tenlong. An incensed Richard pushes Owen against the wall and says his sibling is nothing similar to their dad, as though it was an affront. Owen chooses to go to the comms room and conveys a message requesting help, which is blocked by the privateers once more. In the interim, Harpo and Ragsland are doing the shrewd once more. He needs to return home and attempts to get her on his side. However, Ragsland won't deceive Richard. Minutes after the fact, Richard sees the white opening and Tenlong shows up neighboring, raising a ruckus around town with his strong body. This makes everybody fall and leaves the power field at half strength. Then, Owen gets into the suit and goes out to chase Tenlong, so Richard orders Hawthorne and Harpo to go along with him.
This sits idle, and the clicker emerges to begin pursuing the team down the hallway. Hitting it with the quencher is additionally incapable, so Richard and Lynn take off and conceal in the airtight chamber. The clicker is quickly enough to get up to speed to them and snatches Lynn's leg, yet at that point Richard discharges a carton that terrains on top of the clicker, killing it. A while later, Owen won't secure Lynn once more, and Richard lets him know she be his obligation. A contention results, and Owen blames Richard for being essentially as awful as their dad, who deserted the family to go searching for Tenlong. An incensed Richard pushes Owen against the wall and says his sibling is nothing similar to their dad, as though it was an affront. Owen chooses to go to the comms room and conveys a message requesting help, which is blocked by the privateers once more. In the interim, Harpo and Ragsland are doing the shrewd once more. He needs to return home and attempts to get her on his side, however Ragsland won't deceive Richard. Minutes after the fact, Richard sees the white opening and Tenlong shows up neighboring, raising a ruckus around town with his strong body. This makes everybody fall and leaves the power field at half strength. Then Owen gets into the suit and goes out to chase Tenlong, so Richard orders Hawthorne and Harpo to go along with him.